Hello and welcome. Today I am going to be talking about the symbolism of the movie Godzilla. So spoiler warning, I really loved this movie and this story. I loved it because I think it is a fantastic myth. What is a myth, right? A myth is a story that shows us fundamental truths, timeless truths. So this is a myth set at the end of World War II, and I think that's really important. I think there's a reason we keep on going back to this period. We can't leave it alone. And just the fact that in recent months we've had two movies right about this same period, and I would both call them myths, and that's this movie, Godzilla Minus One, and also Oppenheimer, which I'll talk about soon, I think is significant. I think that's in part because that was the moment that created our world, this world that we live in. And in as much as we're in a period right now where I think a lot of us feel we are at the end of this world, I think it's for good reason that our minds are turning back to the beginning of this world to see if we can't glean some timeless truth, some insights into how we might approach things as we go through this period of the creation of a new world. I think it's very important that this was a Japanese movie through and through, made by Japanese filmmakers, Japanese actors. Obviously, it's in the Japanese language, and I think it was best experienced that way, and dealing with subject matter and kind of a mythology that had been created in Japan. And I really think interpreting this story is best to keep in that kind of perspective and that kind of world, because I think it helps you to pull out the most truths from the movie. This was this moment where Japan had been defeated in World War II. And let's try to kind of go back into what it might have felt like to be a member of society at that time, because I think that's exactly what the movie is trying to get us to feel. So backing up a little bit, maybe imagine a little bit what it had been to live at kind of the high point of being part of that society. I mean, you had this very unique and fascinating society that I think is brought out and talked about well in the podcast Hardcore History, just how unique this society was. And it had focused all its efforts with tremendous success in conquering other peoples through this war period, right? And I think in that, Japan very much became like a monster. And I think a good kind of monster that they were is something like Voltron, right? I used to watch that as a kid, and there's been all these kinds of conglomerate Japanese robots that have created over time. Well, we're a little bit pre-robot period, right? So this is almost like a monster made of battleships and aircraft carriers and tanks, but it's something unified with a head, right? You could say the emperor was the head or the leaders, and all of the society has unified for a purpose. And so this monster was something really quite amazing to behold, and the force that it could wield was something to behold. So imagine if you're part of that society, you're part of that monster. Imagine what it would feel like to be part of that unity and see the success that's coming from that moment in history. I hope all of us have felt a little bit what it feels like to be that part of a unity, a successful sports team perhaps, or a really successful business or something like that, where that unity and the success you're having is driving you forward. Those are thrilling moments, right? Those are the best moments that you can feel. So imagining a bit of that, imagine now where this movie is taking us. All of that has just become obviously shattered. It has fallen apart. Why did it happen? You know, it happened in an instant. A blinding flash of light and an exertion of terrible force, a explosion the likes the world had never seen before, and then another one, and of course I'm talking about the atomic bomb. And so the thing that brought about this dissolution of this monster, which I'm going to call a behemoth, and a monster of order and unified force, was this atomic bomb. And instantly what's brought about is a state of dissolution, a state of chaos. So imagine back, you are this monster, this unified monster. You are a one. You are a oneness, exemplified by the number one. And so when this all falls apart, you don't just go to a state of nothingness, to zero. I think you go to a state of minus one, to a state of minus oneness, of disorganization and chaos. And I think that's why the movie is named that. Perhaps there's a totally other reason that I'm not aware of, and you can enlighten me if that's the fact. But at the very least, I think it fits as far as the symbolism of the movie. And what happens in times of chaos? Well, since time immemorial, there have been other types of monsters than behemoths, monsters of unity and directed force. There's also been monsters of chaos. And usually those monsters lurk symbolically in the place that so often through mythology has symbolized chaos, and that is the dark waters of the ocean. So in moments of chaos like this, it only makes sense that out of the dark waters of an ocean, a chaos monster, a leviathan, would appear that would affect Japanese society. And just think about how much chaos was brought about through the victory of the United States and the use of the atomic bomb. I think it's really effectively shown through the physical landscape in the film, just this utter disillusion. But then go further with that. I think the film is very much showing us how families have now been shattered, and there's a chaos in terms of family structure. Who is your neighbor now? Who is your family? You have to make do with what's available to you, and hence we follow this formation of this hodgepodge family, and you have this neighbor, and her life has been shattered as well, and people are just kind of trying to put things together again amidst the chaos. But even more than that, you have the protagonist who, based on that other system, that other world that has now fallen apart, he had essentially failed. There was an honor system in place, so important to that society, and he had failed that honor system, right? And now he's dealing with the chaos of wondering, what are the effects of that? Who am I now? Do I have a place of honor in this society, or does that dishonor that I earned at the end of that other system, which is now gone, is that still in effect? And you can see that is tearing at him throughout the movie, adding to the chaos of the society. And so you can kind of get a taste in that of just how many things were in disarray in this culture and society at the moment. Of course, government would have been like that, financial systems, everything. And hence, the symbol of Godzilla coming out of those waters is the perfect symbol of that. And the attributes of Godzilla as well. I really love the fact that he comes out and he's big, but he's not that big to begin with. But like perhaps if you've read the children's story, There's No Such Thing as Dragons, which we have in our home and we love to read to our children. If you aren't able to immediately address a dragon, a chaos monster, then those things usually grow. And so Godzilla over time is seen growing. One thing I really appreciated about the monster, Godzilla, is that he was not evil. Did you feel that the same that I did? I never felt any evilness of this, because to be evil, there has to be some malicious cause. There has to be intent to harm. And instead, Godzilla just exerts this animalism, the same thing that you feel from animals that you observe in nature. They may be terribly potent, they may be able to yield a lot of destruction, but they're not evil because they're not intending to cause you pain. They just are what they are. And so you sense that Godzilla doesn't have a purpose. He is, by definition, lack of purpose. And so he appears randomly, and when he appears, he just exerts destruction randomly. He is simply just chaos. And funny enough, you kind of gain this appreciation for him, or at least I did throughout the movie. And it was kind of funny to feel that this chaos monster, I kind of like him, kind of appreciate him. Okay, so then the story addresses, well, what do you do when this chaos monster has appeared? How do you ultimately overcome a chaos monster? And the answer is simple, but no less potent because of the simplicity of the answer. The way that you get rid of chaos, of disunity, is ultimately to find some sort of unity again, some sort of collective purpose. And so the collective purpose that emerges is to address the chaos, is to unify, to survive by addressing this major problem of the chaos itself. And that is a potent unifier. And you can see the effects as that plays out. All these people had skills back in that previous world, and everything kind of fell apart and was in shambles, but people retained their abilities, they retained their vantage points, their particular talents and ways that they contribute. And now what was needed was some leadership, some common purpose to come together and form themselves again into something like that Voltron figure, but perhaps this time for a different purpose, right? Instead of to take over other societies, well, this now could be a unity for a different purpose. And as I observed the solution that came together for these people, I couldn't help noticing that the proposed solution and the way that it was implemented was of a particular character, right? It required a lot of people, a lot of coordination, a lot of technical resources, a lot of know-how, a lot of just-in-time execution, if you will. And if you notice that phrase, you might kind of get a hint of where I'm going with this. But ultimately, that was to pull off this rather large feat of vanquishing Godzilla. And in the process of that, you see the effects as people come together, as they feel that thrill once again of oneness. You feel the cohesion even down at the family level as things start moving towards this. And as you think about this as a myth in a particular historical moment, well, this is exactly how it kind of did play out even historically, right? And this is where we should at least consider the United States in all this. Interestingly, in the movie, I think it kind of goes to efforts to kind of leave the United States on the borders, just outside of kind of your consciousness. Of course, the United States had to be there. And of course, in some way, the United States is related to Godzilla in as much as it brought about this defeat, and Godzilla is radioactive. There's some, there's clear tie-ins with the nuclear bomb and this new nuclear age. But I don't think Godzilla is the United States. Instead, again, he's the chaos that was brought about by the actions and efforts of the United States. But nonetheless, there is still this relation. And so there's this question of how ultimately do you deal with this chaos brought about by the United States? And there's two main options. You can either fight, where the source of this. You could continue fighting the United States, and obviously there were no place to do that. Or in some way you could join with the United States in some way, join at least at the level of values of the United States. And if you consider, what did the United States most value in this? And you can kind of think that over. Is it Christian values? Is it values of freedom and democracy? And I would say that kind of the principal value that emerged, that even helped the United States win this war, both with Germany and Japan, was the value of money, surprisingly, of commerce and profit. If you wanted to deify it, you could call it mammon. And the reason I think that's kind of the principal value that triumphed in this moment was because of the way things played out. When you think about it, the United States had this terrible power at that moment. They had the nuclear bomb. If they had the values of Nazi Germany, if you go and kind of investigate what were the values of Nazi Germany, what would they have done with that? Probably conquer peoples and subject them, right? But instead, what ended up happening? The United States actually creates a certain order at the time, a global order that involves some commitments from the United States. For example, policing the oceans, keeping a force to police the oceans at that time. But all to what purpose? To facilitate a geopolitical order of trade and commerce. And that, lo and behold, defines the world that we have lived in for the last roughly 80 years or so, and that continues to define us. I mean, what is most of the Western world and most of the global world's, the global order's primary value? It continues to be economy and commerce. Of course, there's many other values, but this has been the primary value of this world, the one of the last 80 years or so. I probably don't need to tell you that Japan ultimately didn't fight that. Japan joined in and adopted that value of their own and unified to bring themselves together in the furtherance of that value. And clearly this is not in the film, but I think this is what follows from the film. Japan was addressing its chaos, it was bringing itself together. How did it ultimately do that? If you ask yourself, historically, how did that play out? Well, I think they did it by focusing the society and unifying it, not on subjugating other peoples, but on generating commerce. So that well-planned, well-implemented, high-quality technical effort to bring down Godzilla, well, I think that's Toyota, that's Mitsubishi, that's Sony, that's Nissan, that's Nintendo. That was the united efforts of Japanese society to a very different purpose and effort than industrial warfare. It was the same talents, the same skills, but moved to something completely different. And also into a different arena, a different theater, not the theater of war, but now it's kind of the competition field of industry and commerce, where there would be real winners and losers, but in a way that didn't involve, guns and ammo and blowing each other up and millions of people dying. In fact, I think it's well documented that focus, that cohesion, and adopting that value actually ended up creating a great deal of prosperity, the kind of prosperity that we've experienced in the world of this last 80 years. And of course, it's prosperity that's come at great trade-offs, and the world is always talking about those, but it has to be recognized that this did work after all. And going back specifically to the movie, I think this really plays out well with how you imagine what happened to this protagonist who was wrestling with his state of honor, right? He knew that he hadn't been willing to die for his society. Well, under this new system, with Japan unifying under this new ideal, well, he could now live for his society. And many Japanese people did. This was with a new system of values comes a new honor system. And in that honor system, you don't have to sacrifice your life anymore in that explicit way, that kamikaze way. You could sacrifice your life by living for your society. And once again, of course, this does come with trade-offs, and hence Japan has also been known for that way that people sacrifice themselves so utterly to their work and that company man kind of culture that they end up not having much of a life outside of that. And again, that's because everything comes with its trade-offs, right? And so wrapping this up, ultimately these new motivations, these new values, this new God, you could say, again, Mammon, that was being served, perhaps rather than the figure of the emperor, obviously is not perhaps the highest value, the highest conceivable value. It's not, in my opinion, but the point is it is something that a society could unify itself under, and it is something that has unified this world in a way that did create a cohesion that worked. But I think, another video would be talk about it has its problems built into it, and those problems eventually grow, and that's why we're facing the end of this world, this moment where all these problems have gotten to a point where they're kind of insurmountable. It almost feels like something's going to have to fall apart again, a new chaos monster emerge for things to be put back together again. And how they're going to be put back together, people are thinking about that all the time, but it's still anybody's guess. So these are very interesting times. Again, I think it's no accident that we're thinking about the formation of our previous world in the formation of this new world. It feels like we're in the ending of something and the beginning of something simultaneously overlapping right now. And I think there's nothing more potent than story, than myth, to help us think about those moments, to guide us. And so I'm glad that this movie came out. It was the first Godzilla movie I've ever seen that I was ever intrigued by because it had that mythical sense and that sound symbolism. So I look forward to looking at other stories that I think are relevant for us in the coming days and weeks. Thank you for joining me for this one.